Hello and welcome to the latest Ireland's Future webcast. Like toothpaste, the unity discussion can't be pushed back into the tube. It needs to be happening now and not when a border poll is called. And to further the conversation, joining me here are Professor Colin Harvey and lawyer Niall Murphy. This is the second in a series of Ireland's Future discussion documents, and we'll be talking about it now. It's called Advancing the Conversation, the Way Forward. So, Colin, recently you sent a letter to the Secretary of State for Northern Ireland about this question of the threshold for a border poll.
Thank you, Martina. I'm delighted to be involved in the conversations. We'll start by just welcoming the release of the discussion document from Ireland's Future and commending Ireland's Future for all its work around this issue. But yes, you're absolutely right. You know, one of the things that we have dealt with is the role of the Secretary of State in actually triggering this thing. One of the more remarkable things in this process is that although the right belongs to the people of the island of Ireland, the referendum process will be triggered by the Secretary of State. Now, he enjoys a significant level of what is essentially judicially endorsed flexibility. So I, in a sense, just wanted to know a bit more about that. And I think, like many other people on this island, we would like to hear more from the Secretary of State about the sort of evidence he is using to assess that test and how periodically he reviews that evidence. You know, as you know, for example, Ireland's Futures recently said, you know, Ireland's Future view is this threshold has been met. You know, the test has been met, we're already there and we should get on with the planning. So I felt it was timely to ask the Secretary of State to tell us, to share that information with us. And I think it's sort of a bit scandalous, really, that he hasn't. But it's not just an issue for the British government. I think it's also an issue for the Irish government as well. Although we're talking about the Secretary of State, I think the Irish government needs to have a view on that too.
And this has come about because that's the way it's phrased in the Good Friday Agreement, is that correct?
Yeah, one of the things that's really great to see in the discussion document being released today and in the work of Ireland's Future is the centrality of the Good Friday Agreement. So the agreement essentially frames all this. And so the Secretary of State is clearly given an important role in that process. So it was really about, as you'll know, there's a lot of focus on planning and preparing, and really need to hear more from the Secretary of State about what he is doing to start that process of planning and preparing. And I think at the moment, like to me, it's just, I'm sure like many people watching this, it's really quite remarkable that we're all engaged in a sort of extended process of speculation around this. Ultimately, I think our main goal at the moment is to do the planning. But I think the Secretary of State, the British government, really needs to step up and say more about this process. In fact, my view, you know, the view of Ireland's Future and others is that both governments need to come to the table. They need to essentially up their game because civic society is already leading the preparatory work.
Niall, can I bring you in here? Do you think the threshold has been met yet?
Well, it's all defined by the metrics, and that is the great unknown. That's the imponderable that we need clarity on. It is arguable. I would sustain an argument that the threshold has been met. Electoral results are probably the most accurate mechanism to assess the feeling in society. And on one assessment, there are 9 pro-Irish unity members of Parliament which have been returned to Westminster as opposed to 8. That's a stark metric.
And then one independent, isn't that correct?
And one independent, of course. And that a very, very important constituency, that being the undecided or the undeclared. And really that's where a lot of the focus of this debate will centre. We have had opinion polls of late, most recently on Sunday past, just in this past week. And the Sunday Times opinion poll really provided a remarkable insight into where society's barometer is at, and following our collective experience of the Brexit shambles, and following, and we're still enduring a global pandemic. But of those surveyed by Lucid Talk on behalf of the Sunday Times, 51% stated that they would like to see a border poll within 5 years.
Wasn't that extraordinary, that 5 years? Because we've heard all sorts of time frames put forward, often around the 10-year mark. But the people seem to be ahead of the political class in this instance, and not for the first time. Sorry,
No,
not
and
for the last time.
Yeah, and that's very often the case. Politics responds to feelings on the ground. That's why political parties canvass people on their doorstep. They want to hear where society's debate is at. And, you know, 5 years on one level is a long time, but on another, it's a very, very short time. And we really need now to begin the preparation. I don't want a border poll in the middle of the outworkings of Brexit, or in the middle of a global pandemic. I have a personal experience how dangerous that is. I don't want one next year, but we need to start preparing now. And it's incumbent upon governments to prepare. We do not want to replicate the madness which the British political class foisted upon an unsuspecting electorate, with an undefined question, with no plan as to how it might be executed, i.e. the withdrawal from the EU, and we've seen how difficult that has been. We have the opportunity now to plan. The tectonic plates have begun to shift, and whereas we consider we're trying to provoke and sustain and engage in a meaningful conversation, it's really the job of government, as those who have their hands on the levers of power, who are able to commission actual data based on population shifts, birth movements, demographics, tax yields, to make economic models for what this might look like. And it's not going to be good enough to just begin to do that work in 4 or 5 years' time when the inevitable comes to pass. And it's my respectful view that this is an inevitability. The planning needs to start now, and that's what we're appealing for.
Okay, so Colin, who should be part of this planning and preparation?
Well, obviously, again, Ireland's future in many ways has taken the lead in this. It's funny, this week we're all reflecting on the waterfront event a couple of years ago that I think will come to be seen as a sort of seminal event.
So that was 2 years ago.
Yeah, and I think civil society, as tends to be the case here across this island, is showing determined leadership to drive forward this conversation. So I think it's obvious, because civil society is doing it already. We're not waiting for the political parties. In a sense, civil society is doing it. We're doing it ourselves. But I think it needs to be a broad and inclusive conversation. I think people need to be involved throughout civil society, north and south. But as Niall has said, I think it also needs to involve governments and political parties too. And actually what's great to see in the discussion document, which is often neglected, is the role of legislatures and parliaments. The role of the Oireachtas, the role of the Westminster Parliament, the Assembly. Even the Scottish Parliament may have a view on some of this as well. So I think we need to see wide, broad and deep participation. We've taken a lead, if you like, but it's marvellous to see the others following. So for example, really serious heavyweight university projects that are now being taken forward across these islands to do this work. I think what we'd like to see is funding bodies, those bodies that actually fund research, opening up streams of research funding to facilitate this. And so I think universities, civil society, but I suppose a theme, one of the questions asked in the discussion document is, where is the Irish government? Maybe if I asked that this evening, in part of this debate, where are you? Where is the Irish government in this conversation? I think they do need to step up. This is the future of this island. The Irish government can't be neutral on that. It has to have a view. You know, bear in mind, we've seen the British government isn't shy about talking about the precious union. So I think we need to see the Irish government being much more self-confident, being less shy, coming to the table and joining the rest of us.
Why do you think the Irish government is being so bashful?
That's a very good question. I suppose we have to acknowledge that they have taken steps in our direction. We have seen the establishment of the shared island unit, and I do think that is an attempt to think in a more holistic way about the future of the island and practical north-south cooperation. And we have to welcome that. I think there's a nervousness about the impact on the north. But look, what I would say to the Irish government is, this is not Ireland's future saying this. This is, the people here are now saying, we would like a choice. You know, we've seen the polling evidence that Niall's referred to. People here want to have the conversation. So the Irish government needs to join in.
So Niall, is there evidence from polling of changing attitudes towards the union? We've seen headlines, union in crisis. Is that an exaggeration, an attempt to sell newspapers, or is there anything behind it?
Well, I think it bears to reflect on what really has been an evolving public commentary in England amongst those who might shape opinion, certainly within the British Conservative Party. And whereas I'll speak momentarily here in a second about George Osborne's comments last week, but they don't occur in a vacuum, and it has been going on at least for a year now. And the first incidents that I detected was an article in the Times last year, this time last year, the 18th of January 2020, when Matthew Paris wrote an article entitled "A United Ireland Would Be Good for Everyone." And he said in that article, faster than many realise, the time is coming to think dispassionately about the unification of Ireland. When the expected border poll with the rest of the UK is established in the Irish Sea, and we know now that that happened, the case for reuniting North and South will get its biggest boost since partition. We should think about the gains. The idea makes so much sense. And that really resonated with me. A former Conservative MP with a column in the Times, and it was followed up a couple of weeks later by Dominic Lawson in the Sunday Times. And Lawson himself is a former editor of the Sunday Telegraph, and he wrote an article that said that a united Ireland is the secret Tory dream, and he cautioned readers not to make the mistake of supposing that Boris Johnson would regard it as a blow if the North was to be conceded to Dublin. And we know in economic terms that has since occurred.
Niall, for a party that's full title is the Conservative and Unionist Party. So what you're saying is a huge change in attitude from that party.
Yes, and its most recent evidence came from the former Chancellor in the London Evening Standard last week, and he lamented the unleashing of English nationalism and the jingoistic event that became Brexit. And he has declared, on a persuasive political voice that he is, that Brexit has made the future of the United Kingdom the central political issue for the coming decade. And he has said that Northern Ireland, he says, is already heading for the exit door. The great prize, in his view, is Scotland. And perhaps insulting to those of us who reside here, he says that Scotland's an altogether different matter. Scotland's history is our history, our being the British Conservative parties. He talks about Scotland's contribution to literature, philosophy, exploration and art. And its departure would represent the end of the United Kingdom. And of course, it is very likely that there will be a Scottish referendum in the next year or two that will result in independence. And once that happens, once that significant constitutional event occurs, really we're in the end zone for our own position, and I appeal again. It's incumbent upon everybody who has a voice, everybody who has a mandate, to prepare and to get ready, because this is going to be the debate of this decade.
Well, of course, it's extraordinary that this is something which will affect everybody on this island, however the vote goes. And yet it's an English politician who decides the timing and the criteria.
Well, I think, Martina, although there's been a lot of focus on those mechanics, I think we should also keep in mind that the right of self-determination in the agreement belongs to the people of this island. And I think really our focus needs to be on getting our act together on this island, of doing the preparatory and planning work in advance of these referendums. And what's great to see in the discussion document is how much emphasis there is on advanced planning. So as Niall has said, we don't repeat the Brexit shambles. We don't want that for the future of this island. We want people, when they go and vote in these referendums, to know what they're voting for and against, and to give them a clear picture of the future. And I'll tell you this, I'll be absolutely clear. Once we are ready on this island, no Secretary of State is going to stand in the way, right? That is my view. Once things are aligned on this island in relation to these referendums, once the Irish government becomes less shy on this topic, and once we're ready to go on this, my view is no British Secretary of State will be able to stand in our way. So I think ultimately, yes, that's a major topic of debate, but I think we on this island need to get ready now. And one of the questions that's posed at the centre of the discussion document, which Ireland's Future I know is very keen to hear views on, is for every individual and organisation on this island that has perhaps shied away from this question in the past, are you ready? Are you prepared? Will you be prepared to answer the hard questions around this when they arise? So really, again, to echo what's been said, get ready. You need to be prepared, because when we're ready on this island, my view is no Secretary of State will be able to prevent these referendums taking place.
How would that happen?
Because I think when we are ready, ultimately, as Niall has pointed out, the mood is shifting in England. And I think the mood is shifting in Britain. My view is, and I might be way, way off here, but when the Irish government knocks on the door, or the virtual door of the British government, and says, we're ready to go for this, or we would like to, I ultimately think the British government will take that step. Now, I maybe prove completely wrong on that. I actually think one of the dilemmas we face at the moment is the caution and reticence of the Irish government. Irish government needs to be putting pressure on the British government, needs to be engaged with the British government, because again, the evidence which Niall has outlined so clearly is, my sense is, if the North wants to go, I don't think the British government is going to stand in its way.
So it's not just a question, though, of the Irish government. I think, don't the political parties need to act collectively? I mean, the opposition needs to be in favour of this as well as the government parties.
Well, one of the things that the discussion document makes clear, and I think it's a major rule for Ireland's future, is that what we're essentially asking political parties on this island to do, particularly, is to set aside in the national and public interest whatever petty or major party rivalries they've had. And we acknowledge that they have rivalries in elections and things like that to contest. But on this particular issue, we're urging political parties on this island to work together constructively in the national and public interest to develop a common platform to put to the people north and south when these referendums arrive. So very much appealing, yes, to civic society, but for political parties to show a maturity and leadership around working together in the national interest.
Just to echo what Colin has said, there are times and there are issues and events which transcend party politics and the future of this island. I can't think of a more significant one. And we have had the benefit of the successful experience in the South in recent years, when party politics was set to the side and there was a coalescence of ideas across all the views on two successful referenda with regards to the repeal of the 8th Amendment and also with regards to marriage equality. So it demonstrates that it can be done. And we've kept a very close eye on the successful experiences in those regards. And one common issue that informs our strategy at the minute is that there needs to be the immediate convention of a citizens' assembly. A citizens' assembly was convened and informed constitutional change on the island in the past 10 years, and we consider that the responsible thing that the Irish government should be considering is that occur. We did play our part. We have appealed for those with a voice, with a mandate to speak up. And last year, November 2019, we curated and collated over 1,000 signatories to a letter which was published in the Irish Times, addressed to An Taoiseach, appealing to him to convene a citizens' assembly. That appeal, unfortunately, has fell on deaf ears. The Department of Taoiseach will hold up its Shared Island unit as evidence that it has considered the issue. And whereas the Shared Island unit is an important step, it's an important milestone, it doesn't go far enough in our view. And really, citizens' voices need to be heard. And we would again appeal for anybody who has a voice or influence to call for the convention of a citizens' assembly to begin to prepare and to hear all points of view. Unionism is a noble tradition on this island. The British identity will be a cherished identity forever, but we do need to hear their position in their own voice, and what better setting for that than a citizens' assembly.
So it would be an island-wide one rather than an assembly in the north and an assembly in the Republic.
Yes.
And there's no progress on that at the moment.
Unfortunately, not. We, as an organisation, Ireland's Future has in recent months held Zoom meetings. We're all children of Zoom now. We've held Zoom meetings with all major political parties who have an aspiration in their party constitutions and manifestos for the reunification of the island. And we have had a meeting with Micheál Martin and the Department of the Taoiseach, and we did put that forth quite clearly. And it would appear at the minute, and politics changes week to week, we know that, it would appear at the minute that within the tenure of the current Taoiseach, it's not going to take place. But politics is a fast-moving profession, and we want to ensure that the topic is a mail in the fubble, it's on the lips of the people, which it is. And as we've seen this year, 2021, the debate has been catalysed, such to the extent that you have a British Secretary of State, Brandon Lewis, on Question Time last Thursday, agreeing that nobody should have anything to fear about a mature, fact-informed conversation about our constitutional future. And we want to encourage and embrace that as best we can.
Would the British government play a role in that as an advocate for the union, or would it be a neutral observer, a facilitator, if you like?
Well, maybe if I was, one of the things about framing it in terms of the Good Friday Agreement is that there's an obligation of rigorous impartiality in relation to the sovereign government at the time. which happens to be at the moment the British government. So that obligation would need to be respected. Obviously, the decision, and I think it relates to some of the comments we've made about English politicians, their views are ultimately irrelevant. You know, the British government can't just dump the North into a reunified Ireland. There has to be a vote here. So it ultimately rests with the people. So it will be for a majority of people here to ultimately decide. And in relation to the approach to that, I think that rigorous impartiality provision of the agreement will play a part in how the British government approaches this, you know, but ultimately it's for the people here to decide.
And it's
you know,
two votes.
Yeah.
Are they on the same day or consecutive days, according to the Good Friday Agreement?
The Good Friday Agreement is clear that it has to be concurrent consent. And, you know,
That's the same day, is it, Colin?
Our view is essentially that for a good faith interpretation of that provision is that's concurrent votes, North and South. And really what we'd like to see is a replication of what happened here on that remarkable day on the 22nd of May, 1998, when voters North and South endorsed the Good Friday Agreement. And I think that would be a highly practically and symbolically fitting way to have that vote again. But Martina, I think it's important to be clear, and I think again, just commending the work Ireland's Future, is that people need to be crystal clear about what they're voting for, North and South. You know, it can't be the case. I think we're very skeptical about ideas of in principle, you know, votes without much detail. It needs to be clear. There needs to be a plan. The proposals and propositions need to be laid out, because ultimately, you know, you or I, people don't want to be going to doorsteps and people ask hard questions about the health service, about education or whatever, and people have nothing to say. So I think do the planning in advance, make the proposals clear on either side, and then let's have concurrent votes on the same day, North and South. I think in relation to that, look, the time frame, people have different views about the time frame. We've been now overtaken by events. The people are clearly ahead of many others in the 5-year time frame. But look, what serious planning program, how much homework would get done on the island of Ireland if there was no deadline, if there was no notion of a time frame? People would be prevaricating, waffling for Ireland for the next 100 years, doing nothing, if we didn't have some sense that we needed to do this within a time frame. And now ultimately what's remarkable to see is the people are taking this out of our hands, I think, by making clear people would like a choice in the next 5 years. And to me, it would be bizarre in the context of Brexit if that wasn't the case. You know, what we need to underline again and again, this region, the North, has been coercively removed from the European Union against our will and without our consent.
As indeed has Scotland. But of course, Ireland does have an advantage in that Northern Ireland has an automatic right of re-entry, doesn't it, in the case of reunification?
Yeah, and absolutely right. You know, in a sense, it would be remarkable. It would be bizarre if people weren't talking about that. We have an automatic option of return, and people here in the next 5 years, in our view, should be given that choice. It should be a normal part of everyday conversation, as it increasingly becoming so, and the Irish government just needs to catch up.
So the universities, you're saying, should be funded to start the research, look into health, look into education, look into how the civil service of a reunified Ireland would operate, judiciary, police services, and so on.
Look, people are already doing it, as often happens, as you know, on this island, in civil society and other institutions. People are often ahead of events. The work's already started. We know of the range of academic research projects that are already ongoing, and I think more are going to come on stream in the time ahead. So what we're asking people to do is join in, make sure you're ready when these referendums arrive.
So both governments would be involved in these plebiscites. What about the European Parliament? Would there be a role for it?
I think Europe has made its position very clear that it will welcome a reunified Ireland, single island nation back into the European Union. So the invitation, the pathway is still open, but there is going to be a significant role for the EU to safeguard the economic future of that new island. There will be changes, and I know that it's an aspiration of ourselves within Ireland's future to conduct and in future publish some research with regards to the economic advantages that reunification might bring. But what is clear from the information that is currently in the public domain and the public record, that both public and private sector performances in the north are significantly dwarfed by performances in the south. The starting salary for a teacher in Dundalk, for example, is about €10,000 more than a teacher a couple of miles up the road in Newry to do the exact same job. And in the private sector, for example, there were 20,000 foreign direct investment jobs created in the south in 2020 alone. The equivalent statistic in the north didn't reach 2,000. So it will be incumbent upon international agencies and infrastructure like the European Union, but also there's a new administration now in America, and there will be a required significant international effort and contribution to help sustain what would be a new republic. And you wrote about this yourself, Martina, very eloquently in the Irish Independent a couple of weeks ago, with regards to the experience of German reunification. And I often reflect on the account whereby on the day that the Berlin Wall had its first brick chipped in it, the equivalent of Clareburn Live or Let's Talk was on German television that night, and the host was surrounded by five commentators, and there was a question from the audience which asked, could this lead to the reunification of Germany? And the full panoply of views around the talk show desk was laughter. No, don't be silly. The audience laughed. But within 1 year, Germany was reunified with the significant assistance of an influential Irish government at that time. And that's not something that I think is forgotten in the German political memory. And one would hope that the same attention, dedication, support would benefit the new Irish Republic within the European Union.
Yes, Ireland held the presidency of the European Union at that key period, and the 30-year papers that were released showed that Charlie Haughey met Helmut Kohl, and Helmut Kohl said you could no more stop reunification than the river running into the sea. So there would be help coming from Europe and help coming from the Biden administration in the US, you believe?
Yes, if we look a bit more intuitively towards the current Biden administration, and even look at the performance of significant committees within Congress during the Brexit debate, the very influential Ways and Means Committee is chaired by Congressman Richie Neal from Massachusetts. One of its constituent members is Brendan Boyle from Philadelphia. Brendan is the only member of the House of Representatives who has a parent who was born on the island of Ireland in Donegal. His father's from Donegal. And that Ways and Means Committee held very, very strong in defence of the Good Friday Agreement, and sent a very clear message to the British government at that time that there would be no trade deal in the event of Britain's exit from the EU if a single hair on the head of the Good Friday Agreement was touched. And that voice was heard and respected, to be fair. All the more clearly when Biden won the presidency. We now look to who he has appointed in his cabinet. Mayor Marty Walsh of Boston is the new Secretary for Labour. Mayor Walsh, of course, signed Ireland's Future's public correspondence to the Taoiseach in November 2018, he being of the diaspora himself. So there are very influential pro-unity minded politicians at the heart of the new American administration, and none more so perhaps than Joe Biden himself, a man exceptionally proud of his Irish heritage and someone who pays very, very close attention to political affairs on this island. So whereas we may have a warm house to approach, that's not to take anything for granted. America, and we must respect that it has its own outward diplomatic strategies and relationship. But I do feel that both within the American administration and within the European Union, there is a strong friend that we can call upon when the very significant issues such as foreign direct investment arise. One of the statistics that amazes me every time I read it, and I want to get it completely accurate, the extraordinary metric as to how partition has failed, certainly citizens in the North. It's when we consider our export figures, and the export figures for the North are 10 billion, whereas in the South they are 283 billion. If that's not a stark indictment of the failure of partition, then I don't know what is. A child born today in the North, or sorry, a child born today in the South will live for 18 months longer on average than a child born in the North. That's not good enough in a small island like ours. A 65-year-old pensioner today will live for 6 months longer than a 60 in the South than a 65-year-old pensioner would in the North. You know, we're bottom of all of the international metrics for educational attainment. We die younger, and more of our people live in poverty. And these are the areas of the debate which everybody needs to understand. We need to speak it loudly, and we need to hear alternative views. But those key metrics are terrifying and will require a helping hand from the international community as and when we get there.
And you're confident that that help will be forthcoming?
The public pronouncements should not be ignored. All of this has been said out loud. The EU naturally would like an actual border on its union. And whereas there is an economic border in the Irish Sea at present, it stands to reason, and they've said it out loud, that they would like an actual constitutional border. The promise has been extended that we will be readmitted to the EU upon reunification, and that's not a gift which is provided lightly. Spain has its own internal constitutional domestic affairs with which it takes a very close eye on. Scotland, for example, vis-a-vis the Basque Country and Catalonia. So for that invitation to be on the table already for us really propels us very very much further ahead of Scotland, whereas in actual fact, the Scottish constitutional debate is domestically more progressed than ours. And really, we have to be cognizant of all of the international shifting tectonic plates and get ready for it.
It's a welcome, Matt, isn't it? We're running out of time. Colin, final word from you. Last message on the subject.
Well, just two things, if I may. I think what Niall has pointed out needs to be underlined. This will be a managed transition of change over time, involving both governments, but also the European Union and other international friends of Ireland. Ireland's an EU member state. This will be happening in an EU member state, and the promise has been given. EU member states and EU institutions will have an interest in what happens in Ireland. So it will be a managed and supported transition. But I'd just like to end by take just a bit of a personal reflection. My panelist this evening, Niall Murphy, we're thinking a lot this week about the last few years. And I just want to take a moment to commend Niall and the work that he has done, but actually the whole team involved in Ireland's future. We've been on the most remarkable journey over the last number of years. It's been an utter privilege to be involved in it and to work. The level of solidarity in our group is just remarkable to watch because, you know, we've had an amazing couple of years, but there have been challenging times as well. They've been challenging and difficult times, and we've come through those times as a team supporting each other. But I want to commend Niall. Niall originally asked me to sign one of his letters, and I always say to people, you know, because, you know, Martina, some people ask us, why are we involved in all this stuff? You know, we have to underline that this is a civic initiative. Well, I always say to people, I'm involved in this because Niall asked me to sign a letter, and I signed a letter, and I haven't looked back since. But Ireland's Future has done remarkable work. It's brilliant to see this discussion document released today, and just would urge people to join us and join the conversation. And thank you very much, Martina, for chairing the discussion.
So the unity discussion is happening all around us, north, south, east and west, and further afield too. Thanks to today's speakers, Professor Colin Harvey and lawyer Niall Murphy, for contributing to this important conversation, and to all of you at home for watching. Join in, as Colin said. Sign up to our website, follow us on social media. For the best possible future for all of us, we need imaginative ideas, but we also need energy and drive. And most of all, we need you. So we'll talk again.